everyone. I'm back. We are living in an evolutionary time right now amidst this pandemic, and we're having to learn how to adapt and be quick on our feet about it compared to how we might have otherwise adapted to other changing situations under other types of circumstances. So we're finding that we are living in a paradigm shift now. So I've asked the organiser of the annual Paradigm Shift Summit, Anthony O'Flynn, to join me today to share some of his thoughts on what's taking place. So welcome, Anthony, and thank you for joining me.
Thanks for the invitation, Cheryl. Look, I don't have all the answers, and I'm definitely not the sharpest knife in the drawer. So take what I say with a grain of salt and proceed with extreme caution.
Love it. Love it. Hey, I think we should all have the disclaimer. Oh dear. You know, I was having a think about this, our conversation this morning, and I was thinking, you know, everyone's lived through paradigm shifts before. They just didn't know it. And I was thinking about my very first one, and it was when I realised that Santa Claus didn't really exist. So
what?
Yeah.
What?
So
I'm going to Google that.
Then that was followed by the Easter Bunny. Oh, what? Are you kidding me? And then one that I think that probably a lot of us could relate to is when I came into my teenage years, that I realised that I discovered that the world is a very different place to what I thought it was, and the principles that I'd been raised with weren't always employed by everyone else on the planet. So that made me a little bit angry as a teenager. So I don't know what your first paradigm shift was, Anthony. What can you recall?
Well, gee, obviously the ones you just had, some of those ones. I mean, life's a never-ending series of disappointments, isn't it? When you realise that Santa Claus doesn't exist, that's no fun. Well, I had an interest in the unexplained and the occult from when I was extremely young. I mean, I was spending my pocket money when I was 10 or 11 on books on UFOs and even paranormal things like ghosts, and reading books at the library that were about telekinesis, and I couldn't even understand a lot of it because it was statistics and very scientific. So I have no idea why I really gravitated towards that at such a young age, because I never had any external impetus to create that. But there it was. And I mean, I just grew up with the belief that there was life that was, you know, non-human, non-terrestrial, however you want to explain it. But at that age, we're talking the 80s, right? There was no internet. There was very limited books on it. So I actually kind of drifted away from it because I just couldn't get any real answers. So I don't know if, you know, there are other ones, I guess, but at a magnitude of the global level and so on, but we all have them. But I guess that was the one that kickstarted my journey into where I'm at today somehow. Whether it was my destiny or not, it's difficult to really say.
Yeah. So just on that point, and I'm with you there with the UFOs and the paranormal and all those types of things. And I know people who come to the Paradigm Shift Summit over the years. I think this would be your 5th year, I think. Is that right?
Yeah, this year will be the 5th year.
Yeah. So, you know, a lot of us can relate to what you're saying about that. But I mean, let's sort of back it up a bit and talk about paradigms and how they're created in the first place. Who says this is the paradigm? What are the parameters? All those sorts of things. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's a very philosophical question, and it's a good place to start, because when you're really considering, you know, a set of assumptions, beliefs and values, you're really considering what the norm is. So, you know, when we think about this, it can apply to us individually or collectively. But, I mean, what creates those is, you know, it's arguable, but basically we know that you basically live in your subconscious mind until you're age 7 with very deep brain waves. And it means that the subconscious is programmed without the same conscious mind to evaluate the information. So the subconscious mind is absorbing all those beliefs without questioning them with the discernment of the conscious mind up until age 7. And this is a really good analogy, is the old steamships where the captain would speak in the hose down to the engine room and say full steam ahead. And then the engine room would say, aye, aye, captain. And it's an analogy for the conscious mind being the captain and the subconscious mind being the engine room, because the subconscious mind doesn't question that information. It doesn't evaluate it. It's like a piece of blue tack or putty that just gets molded and shaped without the discernment of the subconscious mind as a child. So we're already programmed by the age of 7 to have certain values and belief systems, whether they're true or not, or positive or negative. I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about the programming in the subconscious mind. And the real best example we can see of this is the documentary called 7 Up. Have you heard of that?
No, I don't think I have.
Well, it started way back when it was black and white. And this documentary maker took a group of children and filmed them and asked them simple questions at age 7. And then he went on to film them again at 14 and 21 and 28 and 35. And it just kept going. And the results were staggering because it was based on the Jesuit dictum of give me the boy until 7 and I'll show you the man. That was the dictum of the show, to show that we're basically imprinted with these impressions at 7. And if you watch this documentary, it's staggering how the lives of the trajectory plays out on those belief systems, those goals, those dreams, those hopes across the lifespan. It's one of the most fascinating studies in social science, in psychology, and all these belief systems, values that I've ever come across in my life. It's really quite profound.
Amazing. I was reading a story along those sort of lines that it was about a group of scientists who placed 5 monkeys in a cage, and in the middle of the cage they placed a ladder with bananas on the top. And every time a monkey went up the ladder, the scientists soaked the rest of the monkeys with cold water. Of course, they didn't like it. After a while, every time a monkey went up the ladder, the others beat up the one on the ladder, presumably because they didn't want to get wet. So after some time, no monkey dared to go up to the ladder regardless of that temptation of those bananas on the top. So scientists then decided to substitute one of the monkeys, and the first thing this new monkey did was go up the ladder. And immediately the other monkeys beat him up, and after several beatings, the new member learned not to climb the ladder, even though it never knew why. Anyway, over time, all the monkeys were substituted one by one, and due to the beatings, eventually stopped trying to climb the ladder to get the bananas. So what was left was a group of 5 monkeys that, even though they never received a cold shower, continued to beat up any monkey who attempted to climb the ladder. So in paradigms, there's pressure applied to keep paradigms in place. And they're external pressures, but they're also internal pressures too. Because as individuals, we have an equilibrium that we want to keep balanced so that we can keep finding our place in that paradigm.
Social acceptance is a big one, through peers and peer group pressure and just the general norm of the collectives. But, Jung said to be normal is the ultimate aim of the unsuccessful.
Oh, God, don't give me a life of mediocrity. So we've got a paradigm, and there are pressures to change it and move it. So are there any recognised steps when a paradigm shifts, or is it just that things happen? Like we had 9/11, we had Princess Diana who was killed, we had that changed the way people viewed the world and how they felt about it, and other similar things like that. World War II, the Spanish flu, the epidemic in back in 1980, 1919. All these things left their mark on the collective psyche of people, but if you slow that down, do you know if there are any steps in that as it progresses?
Well, there are ones that affect maybe a country. There's some that affect a continent, and there's some that at a planetary level. I mean, look at the example of Galileo Galilei, who basically came up with the thesis that the earth span around the sun. He was put under house arrest for his entire life for that ridiculous heresy,
Yeah.
and eventually he was proven to be right. And I think that if you're a trailblazer or a pioneer, it comes with a territory that people will ridicule and laugh at you. So I guess what we're talking about in terms of the collective psyche is a tipping point, is really what you're referring to, but it's not anything like what people think. Like, it is said, and I don't condone violence in any way, that the American Revolution was only started with as little as 2 to 3% of the population.
Mm.
So a lot of people think that the tipping point is 51%, but it's actually much lower than that. To have that, that shift in belief systems, values, and so on. But the new norm then is integrated by all the people who are the disbelievers, and then they go on to support that new norm, whether they're even conscious of it or not. So there are lots of them, playing out now. Even the body-mind connection is something that's become a really sort of hot topic in the last 20, 30 years, and will continue to. And
Yeah.
spirituality and science merging as well. So, I mean, everything's a work in progress, I guess.
Yeah, it is. And you just sort of beat me a bit to the punch. I was going to talk about the tipping point when paradigm shifts occur, when the dominant paradigm is rendered incompatible with new phenomena that we either see around us or we experience somehow, doing activity, thinking, all those sorts of things, and which causes the adoption of a new way of doing, acting, thinking. But I think the key word here is rendered, because when we create a video, for example, recording like we are here, and add an introduction, maybe edit a bit, you then render it to consolidate and fix all those components. So when we talk about rendering incompatibility of a paradigm, it suggests that there is a key point reached in the progress and acceptance of change that you can't recover from. You sort of get to a point where that you have to move on from the old paradigm, that tipping point, like you said, because it's no longer working. So I guess my question to you about that is, are you seeing this pandemic coming to a tipping point that will lead to a paradigm, or could lead to a paradigm shift? If so, like what are the glimpses of that, of the change paradigm look like for you right now? And remember, we said before we started this that this is a conversation that is just a snapshot of what we're seeing right now. It'll change in 2 weeks' time.
Yeah, I mean, where we are right now with the day before Good Friday on April the 9th, and I guess everything that I would have said 2 weeks before would be different to what I would say today, and everything I'll say in 2 weeks will be different to what I say today again. I mean, not everything, but just the context. So we're only working with a really limited context. Look, what I've been saying to begin that point, Cheryl, is that I've been saying for quite a while is that we're now in the quickening and the events are accelerating. And I mean, if you just look really going even back to Christmas, what the Australian people have been through, it is quite staggering. And I feel like a lot of people are traumatised. A lot of people are looking for safety and security. They're not getting it in the traditional places that they're wanting to. And it's confronting. I mean, that topic that you've raised, books will be written about that in the future. I'm sure that we're really part of the biggest social experiment that's ever taken place in modern times, as far as the restrictions and the government intervention in our life. There's such a range of different issues that we'll cover from a psychological point of view, health point of view, government point of view, mandating of political ideology, economic ideology, ethics, philosophy. It is so widespread what we're going through right at the moment that we cannot draw any clear conclusions except from a bit of a woo-woo perspective. However you want to interpret this, is that people are going to be mass red-pilled all over the planet because of the information that they're now being forced to integrate. Now, I believe that have said this beforehand because I've been talking about this for some time with the economic crisis unfolding. I started studying that in 2005, and I said there'd be a huge economic crisis back in 2005 before the GFC in 2008. And in 2008, I said, this is just the beginning. This is just the beginning of these things. So for this reason, I'm regarding mental health as the number one health topic of this decade. There will be others, I'm sure, but wow, we've been confronted with this now, particularly with isolation and all the things we're going through. I mean, 13% of the population in Australia over 20, it's about 2 million adults live alone. So, I mean, there's a whole range of things I can comment on there, but it's, people are also being forced to be confronted by themselves, with themselves, because we live in a culture where avoidance is really easy, where we check out, numb out, bypass, avoid, become really external orientated. And now we're being forced to really confront ourselves, and some people are having a really hard time of it, and they don't have the tools or the techniques to really cope with what they're finding, you know. And I would just suggest be kind to what you find. I know that's a bit of a general sort of dictum that's thrown about, but self-love, self-acceptance and understanding it's okay to go through difficult times with yourself is the path to growth.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we can talk about that as much as you want. I got encyclopedias of information to share on this alone.
Time for us all to apply these things, isn't it?
Let me have a sip of water.
Yeah, it is interesting because, you know, evolutionists have been talking about, you know, rates of adaptation for species. In the past, they've been talking about them being creakingly slow. But then that's been revised in recent years that actually it's quite natural for evolutionary jumps to be made easily where in times, you know, where they happen very swiftly because of something external happens to that species. So this is a very, very, very fast process of adaptation for everyone on the planet, really. How are you coping with that?
Well, believe it or not, I do go to the gym. That's not supposed to be that funny. And I can't, right? So I went and bought a cross trainer, and that's now in the garage. And the neighbours are probably hearing some unusual sounds coming out of the garage. I feel like going and telling them that everything's okay, I'm not having a heart attack. Well, I'm doing my yoga, my meditation, my physical exercise. I'm really careful what I eat. I really feel that a lot of the coping mechanisms that people have are adding to their suffering. You know, the whole emotional eating, too much social media, too much negative social media, not allowing, there's a lot of negativity coming out I'm seeing there with social, that's a whole other topic. People trying to, one thing that really concerns me the most actually at a really deep level is what I've seen is people trying to police other people on social media. And, you know, it takes a certain maturity to have another disagree with a person but not get emotionally involved in it. And this is part of the point I made earlier is that people, I'm sorry to say this, but people are being confronted with their own hate, you know, their own anger, their own resentment, their own frustration, and simply taking it on the messenger or someone that's trying to create awareness and consciousness around some of these topics and looking at them as being the problem, which again is like a bypass. It's a way of, it's a coping mechanism, and it's a way of not taking responsibility for, you know, our own emotions, our own states. So yeah, I'm walking, I'm connecting, you know, I'm connecting with the nature, and, you know, I live on the beach, and I'm not really doing that much different, really. I mean, I'm, you know, look, I've got to admit, haven't been that productive in the last couple of weeks because I feel a bit sideswiped in my own work and my own occupation, and everything I'm offering has been sort of put on hold. I'm making a film, I'm writing a book, and I've seen that I'm coming out of that sort of state now, that I'm now starting to kind of go, okay, well, this has happened. I think a lot of people would experience the same thing where they're just a little bit in a state of disbelief and overwhelm. And things aren't going back to normal, whatever normal people thought normal was after this. And so the only way through this is forward and to co-create the new paradigm. And as I've been saying as well, like this total instability that we're seeing now, and many people would look at it as the opposite, like there's all these regulations, restrictions and everything, which is 100% true. But when this novelty phase wears off, that, you know, I've seen people like kind of look quite relaxed, and there's a lot more people exercising and seems to be sort of spending time with their family and so on, that people are going to start questioning things at a much deeper level. And this instability is upsetting the status quo. So it means that it's going to create the potential for change. And this is exactly all the astrological configurations and so on. I mean, for example, people are really celebrating this Saturn-Pluto conjunction in January as if it was going to be some kind of high vibe thing. And it's like, no, this is Saturn and Pluto, you know, buckle up.
Yeah.
And here we go. Like, that was like the catalyst. That was like the domino. And man, who knows where we're going next. But I'm excited. I'm worried. I'm all the things. It's a roller coaster, isn't it?
Yeah, I feel that too. And like you, I do things to process what's happening. And I had a couple of tough days when all this started, and you're thinking what's going on, because you naturally, when survival mechanism kicks in, your mind wants to take in as much information as it can, because it's got to strategize about a way out of this. Well, there is no way out of this for us at this moment. Although this morning I was watching a professor of ethics speaking from Harvard University on a TED talk, and I was very heartened to see that they had formed a group, one of them, with people like IT people from Microsoft, philosophers, lawyers, various people's reaching out and connecting across the planet to be the think tanks for alternative ways to deal with this that don't affect our civil liberties. That so we still have that feeling of we can't live inside a bubble forever, so that the economy won't drown. So that our sense of laws and justice, all those things, all retain themselves, at least to a degree, to give us a positive exit strategy from the situation we now find ourselves in with this pandemic. So, and I realised that at our level, you're at my level, Anthony, where we're talking to people at a grassroots level, we have a role to play and to support our tribe, and people at other levels have roles to play, and they are doing that. They are trying to find alternatives to, other solutions, rather than, okay, well, let's just have all these restrictions and we have to keep them ongoing and let them out very slowly, and people are going to get jack of it. They're not going to like it. You can only live like that for so long, and like you say, because you can only face yourself so long, or the person you're in the house with for so long, and before you sort of start imploding.
Yeah. Well, because our consumer-based culture is so externally orientated, a lot of people haven't really done a lot of inner work, and in this very primal way, just really looking to apportion the blame to someone else with what's occurring. They are often not having tools, techniques, the coping mechanisms that they have create more problems, such as alcohol, internet addiction, internet shopping. I'm seeing across the board, people have taken the red pill. They're pretty okay with it. They're doing pretty good, actually. It's like, I would say that there's aspects of those people that are pretty fired up at the moment and are using social media as a voice to try to get the message out of what's going on in regards to civil liberties, freedom, and things that we have taken for granted here in Australia, which, look, the reality is they're not here. Whether they're temporary or not, we don't know. But the restrictions are increasing day by day, which is perhaps necessary at some point, but how necessary, I mean, it's debatable, I mean, without going into the specifics. But it's really a matter of other people now taking the red pill and looking for more, like double dosing, going back to seconds. Some people who thought it took the red pill, they actually put it in their pocket and then threw it away later when, it was safe to. Other people have taken the red pill, then spat it back out. And then other people are doing the full toilet paper hoarding with the blue pills and going online and finding as many blue pills as they can. Now, I would suggest that that's all fine. Where someone's at, someone is at, you've got to honour where they're at. But the way I see what's to come is that it'll be very difficult to continue to live in denial of the truth of what's occurring, the global agenda we see unfolding, and to simply bury your head in the sand. And it will always be an option, I guess, to a degree for some people, but eventually the cognitive dissonance will wear off and there will be a paradigm shift within. And wow, I mean, I just personally think that this whole process we're going through now is going to create a massive social impact that will remain for the rest of our lives. It's too difficult to say what that will be yet, but people will definitely be questioning the role of the mainstream media and how they are shaping people's values and beliefs, and some of the negative impacts that they've had on people and creating panic and fear. People will also be questioning the role of government, also the role of social welfare, the role of corporations asking for bailouts that we're finding out, not necessarily in Australia, but weren't even paying any tax, and now they want a bailout. So, it's going to be a real process of people reintegrating their belief system and shifting their values to reflect perhaps what the truth is, and, being okay with being wrong. Everybody going through the awakening process. I mean, I, read my first David Icke book. It was over 20 years ago, I think, right? There was no one to talk to. There was no internet at that time. There was no way of kind of connecting with people. I lived in silence with a completely changed belief system for a long time. And now, my God, you can't avoid it. Like, it's everywhere, people coming in. So what I would say to people who are watching this that are kind of, the boat's getting a bit unsteady, it's okay to be totally wrong. When Neo takes the red pill, he says it can't be. And yet it is.
True, very true.
Say no more.
Yeah. One of the terms, I mean, when something happens like this, you have a whole barrage of collection, I should say barrage, it is a barrage of new terminology. And one I've come across just yesterday was pandemic resilience. And I really liked it. I thought that's great. Sounds like an oxymoron, I know, but it basically means, creating integrated strategies to create resilient societies when these things happen, because we've had pandemics and we will have them. I'm sure we'll have more. The more we encroach on the environment, the more we're coming in touch with all types of things that the human race doesn't ordinarily mix with. And I'm not even going to go down the conspiracy track of where this virus actually came from.
All right, got to go now. Thanks, Cheryl. See you next time.
But what I'm saying is,
I get it.
We're laying ourselves, the more we do that, we lay ourselves open to getting more viruses and, potential other pandemics and all sorts of things. So the idea around pandemic resilience is creating a society that is healthy and economically healthy as well. And you can have health, but then you've got to have an economy, and you can't have an economy without healthy people. So it's sort of like a real balancing act, isn't it, for us to I guess, get ourselves out of that. And I think that's what the government is doing. It seemingly is trying to balance those two to keep both as buoyant, as evenly as possible.
Yeah, it's like I said, there's a lot of philosophical, ethical issues that will be discussed. And as we know with a lot of these topics, they are subjective in a way. They're not objective. And that means that, is there a norm that's considered to be okay or not okay? And these issues we will be forced to address. What's really concerning in Australia is that we have the highest personal debt in the world, according to some metrics. According to some metrics, Switzerland has the highest, but it depends how you specifically classify it. But one statistic I saw that is really concerning with, our so-called great economy is that the median savings for people in Australia is $1,500, which is so frightening to think that 50% of the population has $1,500 or less saved for emergencies or specific things. And yet the consumer culture, the consumerism is over 50% of what we spend our money on here in Australia. And this is, again, one of the things that I was referring to before, just generally, is that what are we spending our money on, and do we really need that? Or do we value security, or do we want to look sort of glamorous and fantastic and have this kind of, impress the Joneses and all that sort of way of living? Again, is there a right or wrong? It's not for me to decide, but if you can't sleep at night and you've got all these toys and your mortgage stress now in Australia is over 30%, and you can't afford to live this lifestyle, which is basically a huge percentage of the population in this country, what is it costing you? Is it costing you peace of mind? Is it costing you sleep? Is it costing you basically inner peace? What's that worth?
Yeah.
Can you put a price on that? Well, you can't in dollars, and this is where I see the conversation going as we come out of this, particularly because the economy is going to crash. I mean, it already has. I mean, they're saying, one of the statistics I saw today is that Westpac is now, I think it's Westpac now saying unemployment's at 9%, GDP down 8%. I believe that was from Westpac. In Canada, for example, 11% of the Canadian workforce lost their job in 16 days. Now the unemployment rate is at 16.6%. Unemployment in depression was 20%. And in Australia, if you work 1 hour a week, you're classified as employed. You may be underemployed, which is a huge problem, but you're still classified as being employed. So, I mean, there's just so many things there. And again, of course, the housing market in Australia, the unaffordability of housing for the next generation, all these other issues. I mean, we can talk about these issues a lot, but I'm not saying I have the answers. But we first need to actually understand the problems. We need to be informed about what social problems we're facing, because they are going to show up in divorce, in domestic violence, in suicide, in attempted suicide, in depression, in anxiety. I mean, what are our values individually and as a society? And we have experimented with this capitalist agenda, this socialist corporatocracy, which some people classify it as. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying, what are the results of that? Look at where we're at. The last census, there was 116,000 people in Australia that were homeless. Why are there homeless people in Australia?
Yeah. And I said in another conversation that, I would think, if I'm hoping, I'm going to ask you this too, that through this change, through this shift, this paradigm shift, that we would see glimpses of changes that are heading in a positive direction, so that we can have more advanced societies. And I know you mentioned UFOs before, and I've been heavily involved in the UFO research field for a long time. And so we're talking to people who've had close encounters and report that they've spoken to some of these extraterrestrial societies about how they do things in their world. And they seem to be very different to how we are doing things here. And that's what actually got me interested in the UFO subject in the first place, because I felt that those particular testimonies of witnesses and what they were being told by these other extraterrestrial societies was like a handbook for dummies for planet Earth, how to get from this point here to where they are, to getting through, the whole adjustment of getting rid of wars and having better health conditions so that there's very little disease or none at all. Working new ways economically, so maybe you don't have to actually have money the way that we understand it. Maybe there are other ways to do things, all those types of things. A more spiritually engaged society, that's always really important too, because that really underpins everything for everyone, even though we don't talk about it that much outside of the awakening community. I'm sort of looking for glimmers of hope that, and I'm going to keep looking until I see them, of hints of more advanced society coming out on the other side of this. Do you sort of think that, like we're going to change, we are changing, and we have to change. We can't go forward when the best, we're just going to be forced to go up to turn the corner on that tipping point. There's going to be people who will do that, and that's okay, that's great. But there's going to be people who resist that. And I guess that's one of my concerns too, is that focused resistance of people wanting things to go back to the way they were. How do you see that happening, and maybe how that might play out, or what?
Well, I'm really optimistic about the future in the medium to long term. I always have been. I just have an inner knowing that things will, the co-creation of the new earth, the new paradigm, is part of the cosmic plan. I don't feel that suffering is necessary for evolution, but I feel that the planetary consciousness, as it is played out in where we're at now, for me, it's like we've run out of chances to evolve peacefully and grow naturally, and all the things that you've just mentioned are like sane and from a very highly evolved point of view. But I think it's important to say that you can't judge or complain about where people are in their evolution, because that's just where they are. And our collective evolution and everything we're doing that's dysfunction on this planet is a reflection of our collective evolution. And there's people that do want to look after every person on this planet. I mean, if you look at some of the statistics on the top 0.1% of people, that what they own, compared to the bottom 40% of people on this planet, which is 3 billion or whatever, it's so disproportionate that it is so mind-blowing that there's all these resources just kind of concentrated in this tiny number of people. I mean, when you talk, it's like, wow, what I could do with that money. Wow. I mean, but we're in this Kali Yuga, which is part of the cosmic timetable, which things are supposed to be completely bizarro. And as I see it, the dysfunction needs to get way worse before the collective goes, man, we've got to change. And we've got to change a lot. But the first thing we've got to change is ourselves. So another problem in activism is we're always looking like, this person's doing that wrong and this person's doing that wrong. Oh, that's that person over there. And the last, me? Who me? Am I doing anything wrong? Do I need to grow? You can't be serious. And it's like, this is where it starts. So the problem is not the planet or the species. In essence, it's the souls that are born into these physical bodies that are doing their thing on this planet, that are, growing, but slowly. And the dysfunction now is coming to the surface, as I see it, specifically so we can clear it away and hit the reset button and go, okay, guys, like, how can we do this? How can we do life on Earth better?
Yeah, exactly. And I think
you tell me, how can we do things just a little bit better on this planet? Do we have any suggestions? Or we just stay in our homes forever and hope it all turns out okay? Maybe not. Will there be like a, I don't know. But your point is that ultimately is the souls in those bodies, in that culture, are more highly evolved. And this planet at this time is like two tectonic plates. Like you've got the new paradigm and the old paradigm. That's how I explain it. And they're in tension. And the new paradigm is coming over the old paradigm, but it's creating friction and fissures and tension. And man, it's going to get exciting and concerning. And it's like a case of like letting go of the old and somehow embracing the new. There's no roadmap.
Yeah.
You're the roadmap, Cheryl.
Yeah, I think we all have to write our own and new maps. But always remember, the map is not the territory, so there's always room to expand that map too. You've touched on a really good point, actually, the disparity of development on the planet, and I'm talking about, not just economically and physical, but emotional and spiritual. And I mean, in history, that's always created a lot of problems, so we're always going to get this range of development and within countries and the individuals within those countries of how they do things. And sometimes we'll agree with them and sometimes we don't. And sometimes we agree with them so badly that we go to war. And, it's like, I sort of see it, what's going on at the moment is like a, like the witches in Shakespeare. What is that play where they're standing there going, hubble, bubble, toil and trouble, stirring the pot. And there is a lot of hubble bubble, toil and trouble going on at the moment. And I think the pot will eventually sort of settle down and that's what we're living in right now. And that's what you said before about the stress, the friction that we're going through while that's working itself out, while all those shifting sands are coming back to find their new place, the different place, the places they didn't even know existed, those sorts of things. So I'm like you. I mean, I don't know whether this has been an uplifting conversation, but it's been a real conversation. I think that's really important too, because I think it reflects a lot of the things that people are thinking about out there. I hope that we do have a better future. I was just going to ask you a closing question was, what do you hope we will have learned through all of this when we do eventually come out the other side, however that looks? What do you hope that we will have learned?
Well, the first thing we need to learn is about ourselves and try to harmonise our inner world. I mean, and the fact that, we are in these restrictions has really forced people to slow down. And I think a lot of good things will come from that eventually. I think we'll invest more time in our emotional well-being, psychological well-being. And I think there'll be a reordering of values and a much more expanded state of consciousness around the use of resources on this planet. I think there'll be we've seen so much abuses of power throughout the centuries, not just in the current epoch, but there'll be people are going to want to have their voice heard and represented more in the government. The democratic process will change. I mean, this may take decades to transform, but I would say that some of the technologies coming in because of the Aquarian age, like we'll see Pluto go into Aquarius for the first time in 2023. So I'm very optimistic. I really should highlight that I'm so optimistic about the future. I do feel that the short term will be very challenging for people. I think that we need to live in communities again. I think we need to connect with the earth in a different way and look at the earth as, our mother rather than a resource to be exploited. I feel that we can use some of that technology such as blockchain to enhance the democratic process where it's more participatory. I mean, if you look at the birthplace of democracy in Greece, it was much more of a participatory form of democracy. I think that people are very disillusioned with the current political system. I think that people do not feel they're being represented. I feel like the two-party system is basically two wings of the same bird. More and more people realise that. So that I think eventually there'll be a rise towards independence. That the two Labor Party around the world, the two-party system played out around the world, I think that is something that will transform a lot. And I feel that all as far down the rabbit hole as you want to go, and it's pretty dark, it's pretty deep, that will all be exposed as the light begins to shine on everything. It needs to happen. And the New Age community needs to stop burying their head in the sand and think they can just dissolve chemtrails by like holding onto their crystal and drawing a card. I mean, those days are done. I think the new age community is going to have a lot of growing up to do. And as I differentiate personally between the new age and the new paradigm, I see a clear difference with that. I feel the new paradigm coming in more and more is yet to be birthed, but some of this spiritual bypassing the new age community, that there's no work to be done, we just go in the fifth dimension and have a light body, and I just need to, channel this galactic being called Euphoria from the unicorn constellation. That is done, as far as I'm concerned, and I think a lot of people will realise that, particularly now when people need real techniques, real tools. I mean, classical spirituality is everything that I've come from. My background, I've been practicing yoga and mindfulness and meditation for over 20 years. I'm doing a Facebook Live meditation tomorrow, actually. You guys won't have that up by then. But people are really questioning, what can I do to have a truly high vibration? And, some of the points you raised earlier is really coming back to the human ego itself and understanding your own ego and where it's kind of having pride, anger, frustration, hate, a need to be right, all these things, and moving more into the heart. And that's really, in a nutshell, the collective evolutionary process that we're in now. And we have acquiesced and consented to a lot of the tyrannical abuses that have taken place across the centuries on this planet, simply because we haven't had the courage to speak up and speak our mind and get involved in the democratic process. Those days are coming to an end, because I've been saying for quite some time now that 2020 and on is the time where people are going to start to have their voice heard. And there is a line in the sand that's been drawn for a lot of people on a lot of relevant issues that are related to this current crisis that we're going through. And I don't feel there's any turning back. And we are wanting our voice to be heard, and we're wanting our needs and values and how we want to live to be truly represented in the government, in society, at all the different levels of the government. And this is not negotiable. The government is there to represent me, not for them to rule over me. That is the very foundation of a democratic society, and we need to start to get involved in that process. And going into a spiritual more aspect of it, it's also what's best for the greater good. Putting our own little agenda and our own little ego aside to think what's best for my town, my community, my state, my country, ultimately my planet. And to get to that, that's the paradigm shift right there, Cheryl. And cosmic aspects of that and so on are part of it, which I feel are further down the track. It's an exciting time to be here. I'm trying to take all the positives out of what's happening. And as the way I see it is that the closer we get, the more turmoil, tension, disruption that's occurring, the closer we're actually getting to this co-collective, co-creating of the new earth. And that's the exciting part. And I need to remind myself that. So even as I speak these words, I get a bit you forgot about that for a couple of weeks, It's easy to do when you're kind of, and be patient with yourself. If you're going through difficulties with what's happening, everybody is at some level in some way. It's inevitable, and try to just understand that this too will pass. This is a phase, but it's important that we understand our own innate power as a human soul, and to start to use that and tap into that and understand that we're all divine beings.
Well said, Anthony, well said. And I think that's a great place to wind up this conversation. I'm sure we can have many more, and maybe we will, but I certainly hope through all this that people come to the point, they distill out of it what's really important. That's the bottom line, isn't it? What's really important. So your Paradigm Shift Summit, you've got it scheduled for what date is it?
It'll be the 14th to the 16th of November on the Gold Coast. And we'll also be doing global live streaming, and hopefully it'll go ahead. I'm just planning for that. I don't know what will happen, but I know if I have that hope and that optimism that hopefully I can contribute to a positive future through that intent. You know, this intention thing is so important in Buddhism. If you want to, check it out, paradigmshift.com.au. I'm personally on Facebook and all the other YouTube, and I'm writing a book on this at the more deeper spiritual levels and how to navigate the shift. And I'm also in the process of making a documentary, which is completely crazy and overwhelming and exciting. So hopefully, that'll come to fruition eventually. And also, Cheryl, I just wanted to thank you for everything you're doing, that you've contributed to the UFO community, everything you're doing with all your projects, supporting people on their path and helping them with their growth, because you've been doing this for a long time. You're a veteran and you know what's what.
Thank you, Anthony. Well, look, it's been a real pleasure to talk to you today, and I love to see you get passionate about what you feel strongly about, and I think other people were going right along with you in that conversation. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And to everyone, head over to paradigmshift.com.au, like Anthony said, to his Facebook page, and stay in touch with how that's progressing, how the summit, is going ahead. Fingers crossed.
Thanks, Cheryl. We live in epic times.
Yeah, to better times. Yes. Okay. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.